Okay, we're going to get this meeting of Community and Infrastructure Services Committee started. We're going to start with the consent items, but we are going to remove number 3 as we have a delegation on number 3. So we're going to do all of them except for number 3. And I want to make note that number 2, the noise exemption for Sheldon Avenue, needs to come to special council, as the noise exemption is for this weekend, I believe. So that one we need to move to special council. I see a bunch of people in the queue. Councillor Singh, other than number 3?
Yes, can I move that number 1 be taken out?
You can move it. I'm going to see what others are saying, and then we'll come back to voting on it. Councillor Fernandez?
Yeah, so is my understanding from Councillor Singh that he wants to pull it out for a discussion item?
Yeah, he wants to move that it's, okay. Yeah, to ask questions.
Yeah, that's fine. I was going there too.
Okay, Councillor Marsh?
I want to move the items that are not taken out for discussion.
Perfect. So you're moving 2, 4, 5, and 7. Yes, sorry, 5, 6, 7. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I guess we actually needed to do number 1 as well. Number 1 to move it out of consent. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. We're going to deal with number 3 first, as we do have a delegation to speak to that one with regards to the traffic calming review on Country Hill Drive. We will go to the delegation first. Mr. Bill King. Hi, Mr. King. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
All right. My name is Bill King. I have lived on Country Hill Drive for 18 years. My presentation is in 2 parts. Number 1, my opinion on the feasibility of speed bumps, and 2, the communication from Planning and Traffic Department to the public. I am against speed bumps on roads in Kitchener for the following reasons. They are an annoyance and a penalty for good drivers in an attempt to slow down bad drivers, and they obviously do not work against bad drivers. Nothing will stop bad drivers from speeding. Speed bumps are the worst solution, as they create a hazard for emergency vehicles such as ambulance and fire trucks. Imagine an ambulance patient with neck or spinal injuries, intravenous or defibrillator equipment attached to them, going over these obstacles, shaking the equipment and delaying the vehicles while going to a hospital, or fire trucks responding to an emergency. A study by emergency responders in one city showed that a 30-second delay in response time due to speed bumps would lose an additional 37 lives. Now, I just looked that up on Google. That's for your information. Number 2, how much do they cost and how much to maintain? I couldn't get an answer on this one from staff in Planning Department. I think this is a frivolous expenditure that could be used for fixing roads and potholes. In fact, that's what I call speed bumps, reverse potholes. There is limited funds for fixing and maintaining roads and sidewalks, but there seems to be lots of money to create these obstacles in the road. Speed bumps may have a place in parking lots, but not on roads. Why do we create a smooth road and then place obstacles in the road? It defies logic. I'm speaking as a driver, but I can understand how people in a neighborhood want cars to slow down. But most of them don't drive, so they vote for these speed bumps or any method to slow down traffic when they are questioned. I think those people would vote for landmines and grenades if they could. Along with emergency vehicle problems, speed bumps are noisy with heavy vehicles, buses, vehicles with trailers, heavy trucks, all combined to create noise with slowing down and speeding up. And of course, the 5% of drivers that simply don't care and go flying over these speed bumps as though they were on a ride at an amusement park. Drivers who hate them simply change their driving pattern, and you just move the problem to a different street. In my area, driving on Laurentian Drive or Kingswood Drive is just like an obstacle course. It is overkill for speed bumps. Country Hill Drive from Block Line to Century Hill is a distance of 1.2 kilometers or 1,300 yards. Yet, in that short distance, there are 13 changes in speed limits? Do you want us to watch for children or look constantly at the speedometer? Part 2, communication with the public. When I first saw notices for meetings on traffic calming on Country Hill in 2010, I was very interested and attended the Country Hill School meeting. We were told that this was just a preliminary meeting and more public meetings would be held before anything was finalized, and that approval from council would have to be achieved before anything was done. So I was on the lookout for any information that I could see or receive to see what was going to happen. The next thing I knew, the speed bumps were being installed. No meeting, no information. I phoned the planning department, and they were surprised that I was not informed. There appears to be a list of procedures and information that was followed before installation, but how could I miss all of those alerts when I was specifically looking for information? Last week, I received a notice in the mail addressed to occupant. It looked like advertising, so I'm sure that most people threw them out. It had the City of Kitchener logo on the envelope, but it just looked like the usual advertising trash that we receive every day. If it had a simple stamp which said important information regarding traffic calming, it would alert people who were interested in responding. I almost didn't open it because I thought it was advertising. The letter itself had a lot of information, but I questioned some of the figures. For instance, it said that 102 letters had been sent out. Well, there are 160 units alone in my building, so I don't see how 102 could cover the whole street. The number of people that were in favor of keeping the speed bumps were 42. I say, how many of those 42 are drivers? Of course, non-drivers are going to vote no. I also don't remember getting a letter asking me to vote on keeping or removing the speed bumps, because as you can see, I've taken a lot of time to pursue this, but information has been limited. Not everyone can take the time to voice their concerns to politicians, but I can tell you 90% of the people I talk to hate them. Speed bumps fall into the politically correct decisions that are more and more coming from City Hall. Speed bumps just don't work, and most cities eventually remove them. My suggestion, speed advisors. And that's it, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Bill, is there any questions, Councillor Singh?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. And Bill, I have the privilege of representing that area. And I took an opportunity, I think that was just onset of my first term of council. I actually walked the street to get a bit of a feedback from, now I'll be upfront, I didn't go into the apartment buildings off of Country Hill Drive, but I did go to the residences, and there seemed to be a overwhelming support through them anyways of something that needed to be done. And I'm cognizant of the points that you put forward of a annoyance that speed bumps do cause, and also costs related to vehicle maintenance and, of course, emergency response as well. But there was a resounding concern about speeding. So as a resident in that area, and you know it well, and it has a diverse demographic, and there's a public school there as well. So what do you have in mind? What do you think could be done as opposed to speed bumps? That seems to be a measure that we have. It's a quick and easy fix, but do you have other suggestions?
Well, to your point of when you walk the street, I believe that would be back early 2010 when they were first being put in.
No, it was consultation, so it was actually a little part, yeah.
What happened was the city or the planning department put in a stop sign, and it's on a curve. I forget the street, but it's on a curve right near the plaza, and that's where most of the speeding took place, because people were coming around that curve and could not see pedestrians or oncoming traffic or any serious situation. As soon as that stop sign was put in, it created a lot of more stability to that street. Okay, and I just feel that the road bumps are such an annoyance. You know, there's two ramp speed bumps that are virtually 100 yards apart, and you're speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, slowing down, and that type of issue. Okay. For me personally, as a driver, the thing that alerts me the most to my speed is a speed advisor sign which says the speed is 50 kilometers, your speed 67. Whoa, I didn't realize I was doing 67. I slow down. Now I get back to the point, and you all realize that you're not gonna have a solution for the 5% of drivers who just don't care.
And that's the problem. It's really that all of us do, as you said, pay the price for
Yes.
bad motorists who are not cognizant of it, and they know what the speed limits are.
Yes.
They're full aware of it, and they speed anyways. And sometimes a little bit more obstructive barriers like this seem to be the only cause. So my minutes are fast approaching an end, so I'll quickly provide some information as well. There are other measures that the city is approaching to look at.
Yes.
I don't think we're strong proponents of speed bumps. That, as I said, to date they have been the most quickest measure to do it. But we are changing our outlook, and I'll quickly ask staff a question afterwards, or if they want to add some clarification. But we are approaching to look a wider array of options, not necessarily vertical speed bumps.
I know most cities have actually taken them out, reversed their stance after 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of experiencing them.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay,
That's
thank
all
you.
the questions we have, Bill. Thank you very much for coming in and making your presentation. We'll now ask any questions of staff and deal with the issue. Does anybody have any questions for staff? Councillor Singh? Go ahead.
Just for the benefit of the delegation, of course, Bill took his time to come and present before us. I think if staff could quickly, Barry, just focus on some other measures that we are looking at. Perhaps that's not something that could be put in place immediately in this area, but just to show that we're not necessarily, our mindset isn't to place speed bumps everywhere any longer.
Go ahead, Mr. Cronkite.
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, the city has a wide array of traffic calming devices within their toolbox, and what we do is we pick and choose measures that make the most sense for the street at the time. So on a number of different streets within the city, you'll see the vertical measures, but you'll see horizontal measures as well, which are the narrowings, chicanes, potential traffic circles, roundabouts, those sort of things. There are the more passive measures that the delegate did speak of, radar detection, speed advisory signs, and the like. Those measures are typically a little less successful simply because they are more passive, but they are measures that we're looking at in an upcoming report that will have more innovative measures associated. So more strategic painting, some different types of signing, potential pylon signs, some other things that will make you aware of at a later date. But they wouldn't have been the ideal solution here. The ideal solution here really is speed humps in terms of the type of roadway that it is and the functionality and the ability to control those speeds.
Councillor Marsh?
Thank you. I have just one question of staff regarding the delegation's question about how come it only says that 102 letters were sent out when there are clearly more residents in the affected area.
Go ahead, Mr. Cronkite.
Through you, Madam Chair, there were more surveys sent out. In order to clarify the numbers that are in here, in terms of 42 in favor of keeping the existing measures and 5 not in support, that's a representation of individual properties rather than the number of people that were surveyed. So what we do with multi-residential dwellings is we boil it down to one property. So while there may be 102 residents in the building, we boil it down to one cumulative total so that we can get a more accurate representation of what the entire neighborhood feels. Otherwise, if we were to do them individually, that one property, that one unit, would basically dictate what happens on the entire street. So we use it as a fair and equitable approach in terms of boiling it down to that one address.
Okay, well that's a surprise to me, and it doesn't. I think that's a wider discussion than this issue today. But I do think that doesn't sound like it's fair or equitable if apartment dwellers are not surveyed. I would say that if apartment dwellers, are in an affected area, that they should each receive the letter, and then I know that staff could use a formula to make sure that one address could not dictate the results of a survey.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do survey every resident. We do survey everyone within the apartment building. We boil it down to one cumulative number for the report. So that entire apartment building is surveyed. They're weighed against one another, and we add that to the report rather than separating it out.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez?
So, Mr. Cronkite, when I look at the volumes and the speeds, I would say that the volumes actually haven't gone down significantly, but between Four Seasons Crescent and Old Country Drive, that's a 9 kilometer an hour difference. So if as much as the resident is disagreeing with speed humps, you have seen a significant change in the speeds, especially around the school.
Through you, Madam Chair, that is correct, and that's very typical of this type of measure.
Mm-hmm. So, and the two raised crosswalks that the resident talked about, he may not have the benefit of the graph that, or the picture of the map that we have, but it does show it at sort of at both crossings. I guess that would be school crossings, and that's why they're that close in proximity to the school.
That's correct.
Okay. With the addition of the 40-kilometer speed reduction, I mean, this morning I heard on 570 as well as in the newspaper that it hasn't made a lot of difference yet. Are we hoping that those combined will reduce the speed even more around the school?
Through you, Madam Chair, in terms of the 40-kilometer-an-hour zone that is around the school, we do hope that it will have an effect as well, but with that reduced speed and the speed cushions the raised crosswalks on either side of the school, that does make that area around the school much safer.
Okay, and that's certainly the intention, because what it said in the paper, and I think this is what staff has already said, your survival rate and it's terrible to talk about it like this, but of being hit at 40 kilometers is greater than if somebody's hit you at 60 or 70 kilometers. And that's what we're trying to do, is to make it safer. And there's a lot of kids that walk to that school. So, okay. I hope that gives you a little bit more understanding, Mr. King, about where some of the rationale for the double crosswalk.
Okay. Mr. King, you've had your 5 minutes, and we can you're more than welcome to speak with any member of council post the meeting, or to connect with Mr. Cronkite if you disagree. But we do appreciate you coming in and giving your feedback. I don't want to diminish that at all. That's all the questions for staff. So, Councillor Unesky, are you okay? Does anyone want to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Singh. Councillor Unesky, you want to make comments?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the delegation's concern about the speed humps and going over them. I don't like them either, and I really would like to see them all eliminated throughout the entire city. But unfortunately, we have issues, and of course, there's a bunch of idiots that drive like maniacs on side streets, and you got to address the issue. So unfortunately, staff have got to do their homework and presented the information. You look at the stats here in the staff report from 2009 to this year, the rates have dropped considerably. The accidents are reduced down to zero practically, and it's working. And 89% of the people who responded back wanted it maintained. So I'm prepared to support it, notwithstanding I don't like it. But if it works, you've got to go with it.
Okay, we need a new mover, as Councillor Singh has stepped out of the room. Moved by Councillor Fernandez. If there's no other comments, all in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So it's been moved. So the recommendation was to keep what's existing there permanently. But thank you very much for coming in and presenting your information. Okay, next I guess we will, Councillor Fernandez also wanted to move number 1. Did we take that vote already? We did take the vote. Okay, so we're dealing with number 1, the growth management strategy, annual monitor reporting. Questions for staff? Councillor Fernandez?
So it's not necessarily that I have a question, but I'll try and frame it as a question to Ms. Goss. I think the most one of the most important statements is the statement on page 1-2. The city continues to have the potential to accommodate its current allocated population and employment growth within its urban area. Are there areas that are not included yet in that framework?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. What this represents is it looks back, so it's reporting on historical data. What it doesn't do is include new lands that have been added to the city's urban area through the regional official plan. And on that note, there's still further modifications that need to happen to the city's official plan before we can start reporting on new lands that have been added to our urban area.
Okay. And does this include the lands and the intensification related to the PARTS program and any of those intensification targets that we still have yet to do?
Through the chair, no, it does not at this time. Once we do an updated growth management strategy, we will include new intensification areas as identified in our new official plan.
Okay. All right. I'll just make a quick comment. I'm sort of trying to delay a little bit because I knew Councillor Singh wanted to ask some questions, but I'll make a quick comment if I may, Madam Chair. Staff have been doing such a really great job of our growth management, and every time it's opened up for discussion, we get filled in our gallery with people from the Home Builders Association and our development industry. This report is telling us that we can accommodate the growth that we're seeing. Additionally, we have lands that are going to be coming on board that will also help accommodate future growth that may be unplanned or unexpected growth. So I think the message really needs to be sent out publicly that that our staff are doing a wonderful job of managing our growth. I mean, I'm always here because my comments are always about, we need to protect our development, our green spaces and our sensitive areas. And I think what we're doing with this growth management plan is doing some of that, and I really appreciate that. And Councillor Singh's here so he can answer his question too. Thank you for your...
Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thank you. So reason why I requested for it to be pulled out, this is a kind of a good review for us to see exactly how, as a city, that we are growing and not necessarily the way I would have liked to see it, and at least this snippet in time, seeing 65% or 56 in the built-up area and greenfield areas 44, although it's still better, but could we have more, how could we encourage more growth happening in our built-up areas as opposed to taking away more fertile land and building more houses in further fringes of our community and only increasing cost for services. And we talked about utilities, and this is exactly that cost.
So through the chair, I think that you've hit on an important point in your question, that being that it does represent a snapshot in time. So the intensification level that's reported in this report, which is on page 1-9 of your agenda package, indicates 44% of our growth in the last year. So that's from June to June, which is the year that we monitor for growth plan purposes, shows 44%. The other information that's in here is we do show some 5-year averages, and we show the 5-year averages because in any given year, one apartment building can manipulate the data in a certain way. And so we include the 5-year averages as well. And you can see on page 1-11 that it shows the 5-year average from June of 2011 to 2016 being 46%. And I think what you'll see next year going forward, given what we've seen coming out of our building division and their data for building permits, is you will see an increase in our intensification level for next year.
So that's the direction that the market seems to be going on its own. What I'm trying to do is to take a step back and really see within our region, and it's hard to miss the number of cranes that are around in Waterloo and the level of intensification that's happening around the core and in a built-up area, and we could only hope to have that level of growth in our built-up areas as well. So as part of looking at where growth is happening, does a report, or do we also start talking about how can we replicate what's happening there? I'm not talking about bad buildings. I'm not talking about bad designs. I'm talking about good growth, but growth that's more intensive and sustainable.
I think what this report is doing is looking backwards in time and giving you a snapshot of data. What it does suggest is that I would suggest is a healthy growth level. So we are trending towards the intensification level target that we are required to meet by the province as well as the region of Waterloo. I think it is important to also note that although we focus our efforts on the intensification growth, so growth in our intensification areas, and you can see that every 2 years when we bring you the growth management plan by placing the highest priority on downtown in our intensification areas in our built-up area. It is important to plan for growth that we know is occurring in our designated greenfield area as well, and prioritize that in areas where infrastructure is available. So through our growth management program and our growth management plan, I would suggest that we are focusing efforts on prioritizing growth in appropriate areas and intensification areas at the same time as filling perhaps a market demand, I would suggest, in more greenfield areas for a more street-oriented form of housing, but in areas where infrastructure is already in place or will be there shortly.
Yeah, well, ultimately I make my comment. I would like to see no more pillaging of our fertile agricultural land for housing. I think we can, through our housing policy, development policy, encourage good design and attractive properties that are still more into a built-up area. So, and that's hopefully what we'll continue on aspiring for. Thank you.
Councillor Yunetsky.
Yeah, thank you. I really don't have a question of staff, but I want to congratulate them on another fine report that they present on a regular basis. And of course, this report gets more detailed as the time goes on, evolved from the original staging development report from years gone by. I do want to just acknowledge that you are going in the right direction on more growth in this inner city versus the suburban greener pastures, although we still have lots of land in the greener pastures area that has been designated on the official plan, and that's going to be needed to follow through. So eventually, over time, the shift will change to more development within the urban area. The reason Waterloo is already more developing in the inner area, they've run out of greener pasture land, so they've got hardly anything left. So they're done. We're still got a lot of land, and so we'll eventually get there in due time. So once again, great job.
I just quickly am going to comment that there needs to be a balance, understanding that we only have so much area left to grow, but there is still a large demand for new homes. We look at one subdivision in Ward 5 that has building permits that exceed 400 per year. That's one subdivision that exceeds 400 per year. So there definitely is a demand out there that people want new homes. But I don't disagree with the way that we have to move, that we have to work towards intensification. I agree that we have our urban limits at this point in time. We need to manage that growth. I think we're doing a little bit better, but we do have a lot in our inventory currently that have just subdivision approvals that they can move forward. We just don't have the infrastructure in place. And knowing that there's one community alone, and I know there's a lot more homes going up in the Southwest, both in Ward 4 and Ward 5, we need to continue to service those areas. And this just gives me one more opportunity to say that we need amenities out in the Southwest for all the new homes and all the people who have been living there for a long time and will be new residents in the near future, because this 400 permit per year is not stopping in the near future. So with that, that's all the comments. Someone want to move the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Fernandez. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. We do have someone here in the audience for number 9, so we're going to try and deal with that one really quickly if we can. With regard to the noise exemption, I do want to make note that the address is not 47, but rather 41 Ardelt for the Fuse Nation. There is no presentation for that, but if anyone has any questions, Gloria is here to answer any questions. Moved by Councillor Davey. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask questions. I think they're more just clarification on things I do know, but for anyone watching or anyone that's interested, I think it's important that we've implemented some changes. So I'm not necessarily looking forward, not to say that the venue's not good or that type of music I have any questions on. It's just it will cause noise levels that to residents that are not used to in the surrounding area. And unfortunately, Ward 6 is quite adjacent to this property as well. So recently we made some policy changes in requiring large events such as this, even on private lands, that have to deal with additional controls that will apply to this as well, aspect of language, and whatever some of the other changes that we try applying, if you can kind of shed some light on.
Ms. Vigneault?
Through the chair, we have applied the same recommendations that we have for all other big music type events that we've done this year. Being that no offensive language, as you've mentioned, as well as having a paid duty noise officer available, taking reads proactively throughout the subdivisions during the event, as well as having a maximum decibel level of 65 decibels within a residential zone, so it cannot exceed that level in those residential neighborhoods. And having a contact person available for that event that noise officer that's dedicated can contact should there be an issue and try to mitigate those issues right away.
Well, that's great. At least one thing, I have tremendous confidence in our bylaw enforcement staff in ensuring that things will be done in the way that the policy is outlined. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, there are no further questions. It's been moved by Councillor Davey. I do want to note recorded vote's been called. I do also want to note that this will be going straight to special council later this afternoon. So recorded vote's been called. Those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. All right, we are now going to go on and move on to the City Hall Outdoor Spaces Master Plan. I will turn it over to Justin to do the first introduction. And I do note that during agenda setting, we did allot 20 minutes for the presentation from staff on this before questions. So we'll hear all of what staff have to say, and then we'll be allowed to proceed with our questions. So go ahead, Justin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Galloway, Seelock, and members of committee. The City Hall Outdoor Spaces Master Plan commenced in 2015. At that time, it was recognized that infrastructure in the square and on the Duke Street side of City Hall was aging and in need of repair, retrofit, or replacement. Primarily, the membrane above the parking garage and the concrete pavers are at or nearing the end of their design life. These, at a minimum, need to be addressed in the short term to ensure that costs to repair the parking garage and trip and fall hazards are minimized. The impetus for initiating a master plan process was due to the fact that the function of the square has changed significantly since City Hall opened 23 years ago. Carl's Air Square now hosts over 500,000 people on an annual basis through programmed events alone. This increase in programming has led to a number of operational challenges with the current design of the square, which Ms. Stewart will highlight shortly. It is recognized that the total cost of the master plan is significant and unbudgeted. However, there are costs and design efficiencies with respect to the fountain rink and the stage if they are included at the same time as the critical infrastructure replacements. For this purpose, staff are seeking direction from members of committee today with respect to elements to include in the first phase of work specifically related to the fountain rink and the stage. Following Council's direction, staff will report back on a multi-year funding and implementation strategy. With that, Ms. Stewart, Interim Director of Facilities Management, will present staff report INS 16-066. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin, and welcome, Linda.
Thank you very much. So I've had the privilege of being the project manager for this master plan, and I've had the opportunity to work with a team of colleagues from across the corporation, as well as GSP Group as the primary consultants and a number of sub-consultants. I'm joined this afternoon as well by Chris McBride, who is a senior urban and landscape designer with GSP Group, as well as Tanya Kreisa, who's an engineer and manager of building restoration for MTE consultants, and they would be available to answer questions of a technical or design nature. So Justin mentioned this in his introduction, but it bears repeating. The reason that we undertook this master plan was that we were well aware that infrastructure was coming to the end of its life cycle, but we recognized that in addition to the needed repairs, this was also an opportunity to take a look at how the space was being used and identify if any changes would make it better for current and future programming. Because we do know that currently the amenities that are available for events and programming do create some challenges. We're also aware that the development of infrastructure, for transit development, particularly on the Duke Street side, is quite likely to impact pedestrian traffic flow through the spaces. And we also recognize that while many of the spaces are very well utilized, there are other areas that are not as well utilized and could be further developed to help support vibrancy efforts in the downtown. So the purpose of the master plan was to look at the existing conditions as well as review the current use and the functionality of the space with the intention of identifying priorities for potential investment in infrastructure, program supports, and site amenities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through the existing conditions and describe some of those to you. So after 23 years of use, both Carl's Air Square and the Duke Street entrance paving has deteriorated significantly. Snow removal activities, as well as just general use of the space, has resulted in spalling and cracking and uneven paving, particularly in the concrete areas. We also have granite accent bands that are within the surface. They're in better condition, but these accent bands are susceptible to flash freezing, so it's necessary to put additional salt down to address that, which contributes to the deterioration of the concrete nearby. The upper terrace on the Duke Street side is in generally good condition, but it should be noted that that is not typically cleared of snow in the winter. And generally speaking, concrete could be expected to last 25 years, so this concrete is well approaching its end of life. The areas that we were considering, both Carl's Air Square and Duke Street, cover significant portions of the City Hall parking garage below, and those concrete slabs that we just talked about form the roof deck of the garage. And as part of their ongoing monitoring efforts, Parking Enterprise commissions regular engineering condition reports that look at the condition of the garage, including visual inspections of the ceiling. So in 2013, there was a report commissioned that identified leaking cracks and peeling paint and noted other evidence of moisture penetration. A further study, just this year, noted that the extent of the leaking cracks had increased significantly by 275% since that previous report in 2013. So this is indicative of accelerated deterioration of that. The waterproof membrane is another component that is nearing the end of its life and should be considered for replacement. Generally speaking, the drainage on the site goes from the face of the buildings toward the street, so King Street or Duke Street. Drainage and stormwater runoff is managed through a series of trench drains that essentially run parallel to the streets. And these are covered by slotted galvanized steel grates, which were found to be generally in very poor condition, and in some cases have been damaged and replaced with simple 2x4 boards to fill the gap. We also noted on the upper balcony area which is the lower right-hand photograph there, that there was some surface ponding near the doors. It should be noted that trench drains are an older drainage style, and replacements that are more durable and better able to withstand snow removal activity should be considered as replacements. During the course of this project, we had the opportunity to meet with members of the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee on a couple of occasions regarding the existing conditions as well as the proposed conceptual designs, and this was very helpful to us. Right away, the uneven paving conditions were noted and were commented on by a number of people about how they present significant challenges for those using mobility aids or with strollers, that kind of thing, and that they are potentially a tripping hazard generally. The other thing that was commented on was that there are numerous grade changes within both sites, particularly on the Duke Street side. There's a number of staircases there on that side. And the stage itself is also not accessible except by using stairs. Circulation barriers also exist within the site. So the fountain creates a physical separation which impacts pedestrian flow through the square, and the raised edges of the design present a tripping hazard. In addition to these very real barriers, sometimes there's perceptual barriers as well. So the upper right-hand photograph, what you're looking at is from the College Street underpass towards the square. You can see a ramp that, aside from the impracticality of sort of the steps being built into that ramp, it's also, people are unsure about whether they're supposed to use that access to go up onto the second balcony, so it's a perception of being closed off. The other thing that was noted, again also by members of GRAC, is that the green slate wall on the Duke Street side is of a significant height, that some people find that intimidating. So from a CEPTED principle, these kinds of perceptions contribute to the space as being seen as closed off or unwelcoming. Both the rink and fountain were two elements of the design, of the existing design, that were regarded very favorably in the feedback that we received. And the rink and fountain infrastructure are both original equipment, so put in when we developed the square, and it is nearing the end of its life cycle as well. So for the fountain specifically, it's a series of 5 15 horsepower pumps, one for each of the existing fountain heads, and a smaller 7.5 horsepower pump for the filtration system. Presently, we only ever operate 2 of the fountain heads in order to reduce energy consumption and prevent overflow into the ice plant pit below. During our feedback sessions, people commented quite often on the water. They're attracted to it and they appreciate the sound masking quality of the water, but very often they expressed a desire to have the ability to interact with the water. Much of the outdoor spaces that we have here at City Hall are hard surfaces and do not have protection from sun or rain. And many people commented on this and indicated that the lack of shade does impact on their attendance at events at times. Shade is a very important consideration. It's particularly important to provide protection from ultraviolet radiation for those that are most vulnerable, for example, children, and particularly at peak times of 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and obviously the summer months are where it's most concerning. The design of Duke Street, the current design of Duke Street, does provide a well-shaded little oasis on that side, complete with plantings, as well as the shade that's provided by this building and adjacent buildings. However, to try and mitigate the lack of shade on the other side, temporary structures like canopies and tents are used, and you can see that in the upper photograph. The Shade Work Group of Waterloo Region was consulted during the development of this master plan, and we will continue to work with them as we plan any future redevelopment. Lighting conditions also contribute to perceptions of people feeling safe and a welcoming space. So we have a variety of different light fixtures at City Hall that are used for different purposes, different applications. It's safe to say that the majority of the lights are older technology that provides a static white light that isn't very able to change color or intensity for different applications. So for example, if you wanted to mark particular holiday, or if there was a community marking, red for Heart Awareness Month or whatever. We don't have the ability to do that. LED lighting would certainly provide significant efficiencies and would have the ability to provide greater flexibility and programmability. The other thing is that, especially in the lower placed fixtures along walkways and stairs, we note a great deal of corrosion from salt use. So while the outdoor spaces are a physical space, it's also a social space. It's a place where people come together to meet, grab a coffee, go skating, attend an event, and it has certainly evolved into a year-round space for both programmed events and casual use. And it's certainly considered by the larger community as the place for spontaneous community gatherings as well, to mark significant events such as the shooting in Orlando earlier this year. The number and variety of events offered both by the city and community groups has grown significantly. Over the past 5 years, the number of events has doubled to 100 events in 2015, and the attendance has increased 30% from, in 2015 it was nearly 600,000 people. I'm sorry, I've missed the other figure. So it's a well-used space for programming and events. But we do have some challenges with this space. During the early development of the master plan, staff from GSP Group had the opportunity to have a conversation with Mr. Bruce Kuwabara, who's the original architect for this facility. And he indicated at that time that in the early 1990s, when they were designing this space, it was expected that events would attract hundreds of people, not the thousands of people that we see now. So what we have here, we do face the challenges. So one of the challenges is the position and size of the stage. So the orientation of the stage does limit the numbers of audiences that can participate, and it's not accessible, as I mentioned earlier. So in order to get around that, groups will often rent portable stages and incur a cost to do that. The fountain position also imposes some limitations. Sometimes it can be drained for larger events to create more space, but this is a very time and labor-intensive process. And then, after it's drained, as you can see from the photographs, it must be barricaded because of the physical grade separation between the surface of the fountain and the surrounding area. In addition to sometimes renting a stage, other groups need to rent power, lighting, and audiovisual equipment to produce the events that they want to do. And I don't know if you can see that in the larger photograph there. There is rental equipment there that there's power distribution cables coming back to the sound booth, and so that creates further accessibility challenges across the space. So all in all, these challenges combined really impact the flexibility and capacity of the space for different types of events. Over the course of this project, we did undertake a number of public engagement opportunities. A variety of techniques were used, including public meetings, online surveys, and focus groups. So approximately 100 people came face-to-face with the project team, and as I mentioned, we did speak with Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, the Public Art Working Group, and the Shade Work Group of Waterloo Region. We also used traditional online surveys as well as the Engage Kitchener platform to receive feedback electronically. And we used this feedback to define the vision for the spaces and help to refine the conceptual drawings into the proposed designs. So through that feedback, we were able to validate that Carl's Air Square was seen as the premier public event space for the city. It's a space that encourages social and community interaction, and it is recognized as an iconic image in the city. But to make it better, we were told to better support events programming, a more flexible fountain design that could be quickly drained down and that did not have grade changes, as well as a repositioned stage with integrated plug-and-play capability for audio-visual and sound would significantly improve the space. So I'm just going to give you a kind of a visual reminder of what the proposed design looked like. So the stage is repositioned into the northwest corner. And this might be a Wednesday at 10 a.m. and people having a coffee and the fountain is at its fullest extent. But by that evening at 6 o'clock, we might have been able to drain it down and created a food truck festival with vendors. On the Duke Street side, this was seen as a neighborhood green space and an opportunity where we could showcase our historical and artistic images and artifacts and could potentially be used as a secondary event space for smaller events. We recognize that the development of transit opportunities adjacent to Duke Street will influence the flow of pedestrians, and that the design incorporated waiting and work areas for people that might be waiting for the transit. So while the master plan images present what the potential redevelopment could look like, incorporating all the enhancements for programming and site events that we heard about, it's recognized that the full implementation is not an affordable option, so 3 priorities have been determined. First off, the first priority would be critical infrastructure, which is to replace the surface paving to address accessibility and liability issues, replace the drainage, and replace the parking garage membrane to address leaks and minimize damage. The cost for this is estimated to be $4.5 million. Secondly, should council choose, an opportunity exists to complete concurrently work that could support programming and provide greater flexibility for events. This could include the redevelopment of the fountain and the rink and the stage, and the related costs are shown on your slide. If the rink and fountain were incorporated into the design at the same time as the critical infrastructure, we could achieve economies of scale and help to minimize disruptions. The new fountain design requires a different site grading than the existing fountain, so if it's not completed at the same time, it would have implications on what design may be feasible at a later date and certainly could impact costs. The third priority would be the completion of other features proposed in the master plan and would only be considered as budget allows, and those items would be an additional $2.9 million. All of these figures, of course, are 2016 dollars. So just in summary, I'm going to return to the recommendations that staff presented. So essentially, our first recommendation is the replacement of critical infrastructure, as previously noted. Secondly, the purpose of this report is to seek council direction on the inclusion of concurrent upgrades to the fountain, rink, and/or stage as part of the critical infrastructure phase. And we're seeking this direction at this time for 3 reasons. 1, the overall cost is significant and it's currently unbudgeted. Secondly, these components were identified as a high priority by stakeholders because they currently limit flexibility and present some challenges for staff and events. And that there are cost and design efficiencies if this work is completed at the same time. Deferred work would be subject to funding availability, and staff would work to develop a multi-year funding and implementation strategy to complete this work and bring it back to council. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, right on time. So we have some questions. Who's all going to be answering? Obviously, Linda, you're in charge, but is everyone here to answer questions?
Yeah, potentially, sure. Yeah, depending on the nature of the questions.
Like, if everyone just wants to save us time, come and sit in the row there, and then we can just kind of, because I anticipate there'll be questions that span the gamut of expertise. All right. So, Councillor Marsh, you are first.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. A couple questions. One is, what would be the time frame for the priority repairs to be done? When is it going to be essential for the infrastructure to be replaced?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, the 2013 RJC report, which looked at the parking membrane, identified 2018 to 2021 as the time to replace that membrane. So based on the condition that it's at now and the time it would take to design and program the work, then it would align with that.
Okay. And how would the Duke Street, has it been considered in the planning for the design for some of the Duke Street trees to be saved, and yet increase the accessibility of that upper terrace?
So we did look at keeping some of the trees, especially on the Duke Street side of things.
Can you just pull your mic a little bit closer?
Mostly within the streetscape side, the upper terrace, just the condition and the proposed improvements to create a buffer between the upper terrace and the existing building conference rooms that are being used, we would have to pull out and redevelop that. Plus, with the replenishment or the reestablishment of the waterproofing membrane, it'd be tough to work in and around those.
Right, I forgot about that part. Thank you. And the cost, it was costed out for each component, and I'm just curious about the second tier of costs that have been outlined. I'm just wondering, they're called the concurrent upgrades. I'm just wondering, is the cost that has been estimated for that assumed that they would be implemented concurrently, or would we potentially save additional dollars if it were indeed implemented concurrently?
So, through you, Madam Chair, those costs assume that it is implemented concurrently. So there would be the cost to do the work at the same time.
Okay. And so considering, okay, that's good. Have any cost-saving measures been considered in the calculation of the numbers? I know that, we have LED lighting, for example, that would cut down on our annual operating costs once they're installed and such. Has that been considered in your analysis?
Through you, Madam Chair, it was difficult to get very precise calculation of that without knowing what the final design might look like. But yes, absolutely, we would look to seek efficiencies within the development of the design and the operations of the space.
Okay. So at the appropriate time, I'd like to move one of the recommendations.
Do you want to just tell us what it is now, and then
I will. So I move the recommendation and that the work be completed concurrently to replace the ice rink, the fountain, and the stage at the same time. I think that it only serves to be efficient with our dollars, and I think that if we deferred those improvements down the road, that the cost would only increase. So I think it makes sense to do it all.
Okay. Councillor Singh?
Yeah, thank you. And it's quite the price tag. It's nowhere near initially when we set forward with this review that this was the anticipated case. But I think it's important to separate the critical from initially what we thought was just a aesthetic and safety improvement to the deteriorated, surface area and, around Carl's Air Square. So when the big brunt of this is the site preparation, membrane replacement, and the paving, which is much to do with the underground garage. Have we considered that as part of the costing of our parking enterprise, where the work to do would improve the facility underground? Is that part of the costing that has been considered as to where the funding will come from?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, the next phase of work, we would look at our funding sources available towards things. So if the parking enterprise was a portion of that, that's what we would report back at a later date to council.
Okay. And I think the chart 8-6 does a good part in breaking down and seeing exactly where the costing is coming from. The other component is, and I can appreciate the added future costs if it were to be deferred for the stage and the fountain rink. Now, again, the rink is only about a little over 20 years old. But of course, as you've explained, the issue is the usability of it and the time it takes to set up for different usage. So is there an economic development component of this? Are we missing out on something, a placemaking? And if so, does that cost, which is significant, especially, as I said, where this building isn't as old as many other public spaces or city halls around our region and altogether. So kind of having to bear the costs such as these, it becomes a little overwhelming. So my question is, does the cost of the stage and the pool justify with the benefits received through placemaking and economic development. And wondering if the economic development department has taken any consideration as a part of this.
I think you mean the fountain, but yes.
What did I say?
You called it the pool.
Oh, the pool. Well,
I don't know that we encourage swimming to happen there, but it does happen on occasion.
Well, the fact from my office, I've seen that activity taking place, so maybe that's why.
It does. All right, Mr. Regier.
Thank you. Well, certainly, we've got, as was reported, very dynamic events portfolio here, and this has become the meeting place for the city, and we only hope to grow the event portfolio further. So, the capacity for hosting events and the potential to streamline the logistics of installing new events and taking them down is an important issue for us as an economic development team. You probably saw our team at work on the weekend as we hosted Maker Expo here, and we utilized that fountain pretty well with the balloons sculpture, but it was some considerable amount of work to put together and work around that infrastructure.
So the direction I was going with my question was, apart from deferred costs, obviously through inflation and overall doing it separately, there's an increased cost. The cost of not doing it when it comes to lost opportunity, have we factored that? Do we know? Can we justify it as a number, as a revenue, as a cost to economic development in the core? Have we been able to cost that out in any way?
Well, I think our special events team know in detail the cost of setting up and breaking down on the current platform. I would suggest, with regard to the stage itself, the current stage is really a marginal piece of infrastructure, but it's a qualitative impact rather than a quantitative impact. Although we could fit more people into the square if we had a better designed piece of infrastructure. Maybe, Jeff, you want to talk about the cost of setting up and breaking down on the existing platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So the existing stage, in its current state, is for the most part unusable. Typically, the only groups that are using it are very small community groups or rallies that would take place. For our larger events, ones you're going to get an audience of 500 plus, up to several thousand, like a Canada Day of Blues. We have to rent a stage line and bring it in. The square in its current configuration can only accommodate what's called an SL100. That's something that we would use for Cruising on King, Rock and Rumble, which is a smaller platform for entertainment. In order to get an SL250, which is something that the Blues Festival would use, Canada Day, when you're bringing in a larger band with larger backline, which is the sound system that they would bring in. The current square cannot accommodate that, so it's a cost to every event. And a small stage, an SL100 that we bring in for events on the square, will range on a non-holiday anywhere from $8,000 to $11,000, plus the additional backline, depending on the entertainment that you're bringing in. An SL250 just goes up from there, so you're looking closer to $14,000 to $18,000 per, plus the backline, the sound, the lighting package that you would bring in to accommodate the size of the event.
Okay. Can I just ask one quick question? This is carrying forward with what he's saying, so I don't want to be missed. Mr. Young, so if the pool were to be done differently, where it's more usable more immediately, and the stage is oriented differently, how many people could it accommodate in the square along with the fronting street, as opposed to how many people can be accommodated now? Do you have that number?
I know roughly. Inside the pool, and I'm just looking at the visual and trying to jog my memory of what we typically use. For a setup like the Blues Festival, when we drain the fountain and use the licensed area, you can get about 800 people in there. So not being able to utilize that space fully because of the different changes in the grade, the drop-offs and whatnot, you do lose out on several hundred. If you don't completely drain the pool, you're probably 1,300 plus that you can't accommodate for an event. For Cruising on King and Rock and Rumble this year, we put the stage configuration right in front of City Hall, similar to Oktoberfest. Oktoberfest, they're in the same predicament that we've been for all of our events. If you drain the pond, which they don't for Oktoberfest, it reduces the number of people. It also, the current configuration of the stage really limits the viewing angle because you can't run down towards, I guess it would be Water Street. Whereas if it's square to City Hall, you just have that much more of a wide viewing angle to further increase the attendance. You can run down Gaukel, you can run down towards Ontario, in the other direction towards Water.
Okay, thank you. Up next, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Galloway, CLOC. Jeff, I wonder if you can maybe comment on if we've had to turn away any events or people said no to us because of the current restrictions and conditions of the square?
We've had to limit what a group could do. Typically, the smaller community groups are dependent on a small pool of funding, or they go through the Tier 2 grant process. And allocating $10,000 for a stage is just not affordable for them. So we try to dress up the existing stage or platform that we have on the square to make it look more like a stage for them. We try to get creative with truss and different dressings and how we do the lighting and the sound for them. But at the end of the day, it's still a rectangular concrete slab. Okay. So it really limits, the wow factor for some of these events. They can bring in world-class entertainment, but they don't have the budget dollars to really showcase that entertainment, and it hurts in the production value for the attendees when they come to an event.
Okay. And maybe on the other side of that, are there events that we might be able to attract if these improvements went through?
Well, I think so. There's a number of events that are taking place in the park that may be outgrowing the park, Victoria Park specifically, where if there was a more usable footprint, and if we had some of these shade structures in there, they'd be more apt to move up to downtown, just because there's far more space that they can move around. You're not ringed by residential, which is always something that we're mindful of. So yeah, there definitely would be an opportunity to have increased use with a larger footprint.
And maybe more of a other staff question, but any estimate of cost or energy savings for staffing with efficiency? We've heard some of what has to be done to drain the pool and things like that. And any idea if of the savings we might be able to have with that?
Again, I'll ask Jeff to respond, but to drain the pool, you're looking at 2 to 3 day operation to shut it down and start it back up again, which includes setting up of a protective ring around the pool to make sure that people are not injuring themselves on the grade separation there. Jeff, I don't know if you've got...
I think Linda wanted to add something. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was to respond to your question, Councillor Schneider. Just with regards to the fountain, when it is drained down, it is, as Mr. Regier has mentioned, several days process, and it is approximately $900 worth of labor to do that, because each of the fountain heads, individual fountain heads, have to be removed and covered over so that the surface of the fountain can be used. And then, of course, the reverse is true when we put it back into use as a fountain.
Okay, great. And then just maybe out there question, is there a possibility of naming rights and sponsorship for some of the individual features within Carl's Air Square, perhaps the fountain, the stage? Could that be part of it?
Mr. May?
Through you, Madam Chair. We have a specific policy on this. As I recall, Council did limit the assets related to City Hall. The one thing you would not want to do is have a different sponsor on all of the different elements. So you wouldn't want a stage sponsor, a fountain sponsor, a tree sponsor. I mean, so we would have to take, first of all, we would likely have to seek an exemption from the policy you just approved not too long ago. And then we would have to take a comprehensive approach to looking for private sector partners.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So I have a bunch of questions around the whole shade issue, because I think you know that that's been a big issue for myself, but also for the the shade policy group. And just for rest of councils and our corporate leadership team, I did hand out to everybody key points from the City Hall project audit. DW is Dennis Wayland, who's part of the regional shade policy, and he did an audit on the plan and as well as what's existing out there. When I looked at some of the designs, and I'm hoping that most of these are still conceptual. Is that right, or are they pretty fixed?
Linda?
I would consider them to be, we worked from a conceptual design towards a proposed design, but that does not mean that this is the final design. Each of these designs would still continue to be developed further into a final design.
Okay, because I think there are some things that have been missed in the design that I'm looking at, and those really came out pretty clearly when I met with Dennis and Annie. And some of them are, the movable trees, the far left side, the amount of shade that's actually going to be projected on those umbrellas is minimal. The pool, a really big concern about the pool, because we're going to be asking children to be out in the middle of this pool where there is absolutely no shade at all. And I think those are critical points that we have to be looking at in our design. So I'm glad to hear that you're going to be working with them some more, and I hope that you'll take their audit into consideration. When we're looking at the stage, I don't see that the stage the location is changing. Is that my understanding from this picture that's here right now? It's just going to be bigger?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, the position would be changed. It's parallel to the councillor wing currently, so it would be turned on a 45-degree angle, and it would be moved farther back towards the College Street underpass. And we're also able to achieve accessibility that way, so that accessibility, you could come directly onto the rear of the stage from the ramp, so it is moved back and onto an angle.
Okay, so all right, then just the way I was looking at it was I was trying to think of the configuration out the front. I didn't realize that, yes, you're right, it is parallel to it. Again, I'm going to comment on the shade issue. I mean, from 11 to 3, you're still going to get a tremendous amount of sun on that stage, on those steps, where I think you're suggesting that people could actually sit. Is that my understanding?
Yes, it was suggested that if the stage were not in use, that it could provide some additional seating, yes.
Okay. From Dennis's audit, there would not be any shade there available between 11 and 3, which is the critical hours. If we're looking at the costs, the Duke Street side, could that be separated out from focusing on this front, on the Civic Square front?
Through the chair, it could be separated out. It could not be separated out with regard to the critical infrastructure, or not easily, because that parking membrane and the paving, is all concurrent to the site. It could be separated out with regards to some of the other amenities, but for the most part, everything that's proposed in the concurrent items are on the Carl Zare Square side.
Okay, and I think that's an important distinction for us to understand, because I think although you've expressed some concerns about the Duke Street side, it's actually a nice, quiet, shady area, and some of as the LRT is going through there, I think it will become a more usable site, despite maybe some of the concerns. I think as far as the critical components, I think we need to work that all in together. Where are we looking at the funding coming for this project?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, we would report back on that, but part of the strategy in getting the master plan in front of council is to have opportunities to look for partnerships with the provincial or federal government if there's allotments of funding coming forward for these types of projects.
So essentially, there is no funding in the budget right now for any component at all.
Through the chair, currently there is no funding allotted to Carl's Air Square at this point in time.
Okay. And even the critical work, which you said I think was 2018 in the budget?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay.
That's the last paragraph in the recommendation, just with regards to funding.
I know, I just wanted to make sure it was publicly. I have more questions, I'll come back.
Okay. Councillor Nitsky.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Some of the answers may have been answered from the questions posed, but mine are more sort of structural questions. It just mentioned that the earliest, as I would see, is 2018 for most critical issues to be addressed. So that's sort of like 2 years from now. Is that okay as things deteriorate over the next 2 years, or are we more in a crisis situation than 2 years from now?
Sorry, just finding my... Go ahead, it's Tammy, right?
Tanya from MT.
Sorry, Tanya.
We're comfortable with the next 2-year time frame. So essentially you have some delaminations, you have some leaking cracks. Certainly the practice here is to salt the pavers for safety reasons, and that is currently going into the structural concrete deck. So while we don't want to defer for an extended period of time, like we don't want to push this out 10 years, we are very comfortable with the 2-year time frame.
Okay, appreciate that. So let's assume that council goes ahead and approves the recommendation that's put forward, and money is found, and we get the ball rolling. In terms of the work that has to be designed with those the concrete pavers and everything else, does the square totally close down? Do you have to remove all the concrete, so you just sort of put a new fascia over it, or how does it affect the underground parking? Do we lose a whole level of underground parking because there's no square there because you've got to rebuild it? What are you looking at?
Okay, so all the concrete pavers would be coming out. They sit on some form of granular base right now, and then the membrane that's protecting the structure is beneath that. So all that is coming off. In terms of access and use during that time, we would not close off the entire area. It would probably be, although one construction project, it would be probably phased in half so that you'd maintain some form of access to the entrance. I mean, this is all very detailed discussion, and we haven't really talked about this, but anyways, on the fly, that's typically how we do it. In terms of what's going on underneath, we would have to have shoring to support the structure in areas where we have significant concrete deterioration, as we'll be removing some areas of the soffit, which is the underside that you can see from where you're parking your vehicles, as well as deterioration on the top side that right now we can't see, and we don't know exactly the extent of that. So in the areas that are shored, you would lose some parking spaces. Depending on the phasing of the job, you would still be able to maintain access to the garage as a whole. So we'd work with you guys to assign, typically we would assign like a minimum number of spaces that a contractor needs to maintain, and then they design their phasing plan around that.
So would this be a project, how long would it take to do the whole job? Are we just looking at a few months, or are we looking 2 years, or any ballpark? Even if you're going to be phasing it, it's going to be a period of time.
It's really aggressive to take this in one construction season.
So say it again?
It'd be really aggressive to take this in one construction season. So like just thinking from March to December as a construction season, because there are definitely items that you could start off pretty well first thing out of the gate. I mean, I would think that the Carl Zare side would probably be probably like 1 year for like the critical items to the pavers, and then kind of come back for the stage and some of the finishing items in the following spring. This completely off the top of my head. And then continue on to the Duke Street side. So I'm thinking 2 full construction seasons is fairly reasonable.
Okay, thank you. So based on that, then I'm throwing a question to Jeff. If this is going to take a period of time, how does it affect the events that we have right now? And will they be relocated? They'll be canceled? You'll be squeezed into a small little part of City Hall Square? How are you going to handle that, especially the bigger events, Oktoberfest and blues festivals and stuff of that
Jeff,
nature?
you can give an answer, but that is in the recommendation on the last paragraph, that not just funding, but the implementation strategies coming back. Really, we're here today to decide on the master plan and what direction staff are going to go in. I'll get Jeff to. I'm going to get Justin to answer first, and then Jeff. But I'm not sure all that's been factored into this moving forward.
Through the chair, so we are at a conceptual design at this point in time. So to your point, we don't know the details around that. One thing that I would like to add is if council chooses to defer the fountain and we were able to work up some design later, it would actually impact for a longer period of time. So if a decision is to defer the fountain redesign, then we would likely be extending that by doubling the length of time that impacts would be in this square.
Jeff, did you have anything to add?
Just in terms of
preliminary?
Yeah, at this point, I would have no idea. It would all depend. But we would be nimble and, just like we were with construction in the downtown this year, we just reconfigure and make do with what we have for the short term.
Okay, Councillor Davey.
Thank you, and thanks this report. There is certainly some sticker shock associated, but that's where my questions lie. I guess I'm going to start with, I guess I don't have a clarity. Of course, it's very clear that we don't have funding sources yet, but that causes the difficulty of making a decision on this. So, for example, I've heard that there will be operating savings. For example, I heard $900 for doing something with the fountain, and I've heard potential savings if the stage does go ahead in terms of the operating costs on that. And I guess my question to staff, simply in terms of the recommendation, is: does approving everything today, is this the last shot that we have at really saying yes or no? I need clarity on that point. So, for example, if we approve the recommendation as put forward by Councillor Marsh, and then we find out at a later point that there's no opportunity for cost recovery, for example, as I hope there is on the stage, is there a second opportunity to pull this out?
Mr. Reedman?
Through the chair, there will be another opportunity when we bring back the implementation strategy. So we would have better costing around those components to report back to council at that time. But we do need direction from council on whether or not they agree with the vision that's presented, and primarily that focuses around the stage and the fountain at this point in time.
Okay, so the concern at this point, really, if I'm understanding correctly then, is staff wants to make sure before they go ahead and do the work, and I guess there'll be some associated costs in doing that work for the fountain and the stage. They want to ensure that that's council's intention is to at least look at it before it comes forward.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, I'll just have comments then. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Vorinovic.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you to staff for all of the work that's been done on this thus far and trying to get input from the community and so on. I certainly like some of what I see, but I also am just wondering if some things have been considered as part of what's being proposed here. You mentioned earlier that you did have a conversation with the original architects, Bruce Kuabera, and I'm wondering, because we're contemplating some significant changes to the original look and part of what was intended by the look, did we get any input from them in terms of that? I think in particular things like the green wall, which was meant to be a visual link between City Hall down Gaukel Street to Victoria Park. I look at the area where it seems you're making changes, although I'm not clear, to the left of basically that stairwell that you showed in the presentation that comes down from the second level and so on. Have we looked and considered any of those things?
So in our conversations with Bruce, he was mindful of respecting the original architecture, and we've done that. But he does understand that over 30 years, a civic space like this does change, and there is a need for change. The green slate wall was one point that was discussed at length, and I think he felt as though, it's a strong architectural component when understood, but it's one that's lost. We asked a lot of citizens and stakeholders if they understood the importance of it, and they really, for the first time, had heard that the wall actually penetrated and extended through the building. We wanted to still symbolize that, and we've respected it in the ground plane with extending the green slate as a paver material, and then the green representation with the movable trees set to that linear connection down to Victoria Park. The question about the stair ramp system that takes you up to the balcony, that stays as is. Actually, we haven't changed that.
Okay.
The artwork that's there is still there. Really, the only two big modifications that we've made is we've increased the fountain size a little bit. We've reoriented the stage, and we've also looked to move Williams Cafe, who's the current tenant, their outdoor patio space under the overhang. It's a highly underutilized space currently, so we thought it would open up the civic space a little bit more and give them cover for more of an outdoor patio, with thinking this tenant could change over the years, so we don't know what that space will be used for.
Right, and certainly that's something that looks encouraging and would see better use of that space. On the opposite side there, if I'm looking at this appropriately, it seems to me that you actually have closed off the piece, the overhang, and are using it as additional either retail space or something?
Sorry.
That was an item that came up. We actually went back and forth on what to do with that wing of the building. I know it's been an issue over time, finding a tenant that's successful on the business side of things. Part of our vision was to extend that into the building outwards. The bigger picture is looking at this becoming more like a informational hub or a BIA type development space, or Hamilton's done something where they're utilizing civic space along James Street to actually showcase works within the city. There's a lot of development happening in Kitchener. People aren't aware of that development. It's an opportunity for, say, there's an open house in the Rotunda. You move the presentation boards into there. The public can come by on a Monday or a Wednesday, and they can weigh in using a chalkboard wall, or they can leave comments and feedback at that time. So really, we're just trying to look to capitalize that.
But potentially, that would be an additional source of revenue if we chose to lease it out to the municipality. Okay, on the issue of the ice rink, one of the things that's a particular strength of our ice rink versus the one in Uptown is the fact that we can maintain ice to, plus 8-ish temperature, plus 10. And I think that's largely because of the way we have it set up with the fountain and so on. Will that ability be lost, and will we be more limited in terms of how long we can keep our ice in place if we get rid of the fountain? Because the ice is a huge animator of the square from late fall to really up to Easter weekend.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, we did speak with our colleagues in the sport division, and certainly the depth of the fountain that's converted to the ice rink and having the hard edges that we currently have does make that easier to maintain a solid ice surface. If we go to a shallower fountain design, we would have to put in some temporary structures to help hold the edge, if you will, and it would sort of gently slope out to a more gradual. So it would be deeper in the center and then more gradual as you move outward. So yes, that might impact the operations of the rink, but again, without sort of having the direction on how to proceed, we did not look in detail at how that might impact operations.
Okay, I guess that's something I'd like to understand before
I mean, we give you a definitive one way or the other? Because if all of a sudden, if it's going to impact, the ice by a month and a half, a year, that may change sort of what my views are in terms of how we might want to proceed. I ran out of time, so I'll bring back in.
You certainly did. All right. I have one question before we go around a second time. So this is obviously you've come this far through public consultation and you've looked at a bunch of different things. And I'm focused more on the fountain area and the ice rink, and understanding the difficulties that we have for setup and takedown. Is there anything that is like a middle ground versus the ultimate that we've looked at from a cost perspective that, we may be able to switch up the drainage, still fix the system that we need, but still kind of keep that footprint overall, and still allow it to be drained faster and meet a number of the criteria that we would like to from that space? Was there any other options that we could look at, or is this really an all or nothing with regards to the fountain and the ice rink piece? Justin?
Through the chair, I think the driver for this as well was just the overall accessibility. So having any edges around the area really impacts how the space can be used from an operations perspective and a programming perspective. So we did look at alternatives as we were building this, but and primarily around where the stage was located and how it operated. But the fountain was really either you keep the current edge design or look at something that is edge free and that has significant grading impacts on the square.
So in my simple mind, you can't just take out the edging and find a different drainage system so it doesn't have to come over the front and make it flat, and kind of do something more from a to get a lot of your functional pieces ticked off, but not where we have to completely overhaul the whole entire operation of that one specific aspect of the square.
Through the chair, there's a fairly steep grade change in the square, so it would be a challenge to get a fountain that would meet those needs. It is something we could look at in a little bit more detail as part of the next phase.
Okay, I think just from a cost perspective, it may be something that may be worthwhile at least looking at, but still trying to, because I agree with a lot of the points that you're trying to accomplish in making that change. I'm just wondering if there's something that can be a little less costly in doing in accomplishing most of those things. Yes.
We did look at some efficiencies in creating a hybrid design. I think where you're limited is, one, the technology that's currently being used is 20 plus years old. Mm-hmm. So you have the opportunity to upgrade and make a more highly efficient, sustainable system. And that infinity edge towards King Street is your limiting factor. And as Justin mentioned, is your grade change along the edges. You're always going to constantly have that separation from the King Street streetscape up into the water fountain. You could remove the infinity edge and implement a buffer or a wall type system there, but I don't know if there's a magnitude of efficiencies in that. You may save some, but not entirely a huge cost savings compared to redesigning towards a new fountain.
Right, I don't disagree with that. It's something just that I would like to have looked at as the process moves forward. That's my questions. So I got a bunch of people in the queue. I think Councillor Singh, Councillor Fernandez, and Mayor Verbanovic have asked for a second round of questions. Was there anybody else? You had more questions, Councillor Yaneski? I know, there's also people in for comments, so I'm just trying to order everybody. Okay, we're sticking with questions. So Councillor Singh, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm still trying to separate the two components between what needs to be done in Carl Zeier Square and what the recommendations are in the rear of City Hall for Duke and College and the upper terrace along Yonge Street. So did I misunderstand, but I heard that the Duke and College, that's also the critical component as well? I didn't realize there was a garage underneath there.
Yes, it is included as part of the garage does extend under Duke Street as well.
Okay, all right. in the past I had heard that the Duke Street area, that parcel was designed in a way for perhaps a future tower. So that was to be done on top of an existing garage, or? But anyways, it doesn't matter. That's for a different discussion. So I'm assuming the cost related to repairing the membrane and whatever the tiles, that's part of the component in the paving and site preparation, or that's included into the upper terrace and site features for development, or is that additional components? Are those additional components from the membrane repair? Where it says site features development of Duke College, amphitheater, enhancement to site, planters, flag, pole, that's separate from the critical components of the tiles and the membrane, correct? Yes, that is correct. Okay, all right. So, and that can be done at a later point as well, probably at a higher cost, but it can be done at a later point as well.
Yes, it could be.
Okay. It talks about a bus shelter. Why are we including that? Obviously, that's part of the regional component. Are we assuming that we're going to enhance the structure in a way, and we're taking that cost?
Through the chair, was as we were going through the design, again, recognizing that this might be used in a different way than it has been currently, and partially to also acknowledge that there's not a lot of shade along there, we were looking at designing an enhanced structure. I mean, certainly the region will provide the basic structure, shelter that they would provide there, but just to incorporate it into the design and kind of making it flow more was part of the rationale for that.
And we're sending the bill afterwards to the region, though, right? Oh, okay. It's not lost on me that this is very high level, that this is just a part of the master plan. Obviously, the costing, the budgeting, and where the funding will come from, that's part of an extensive dialogue later. What gives me a little bit concern is we are focusing on the stage and the reflective pool or fountain, whatever you want to call it. But we're losing sight on, I'm seeing the picture, but no one's really talking about the planning, the shade, the site furnishing. So much of what I see on the picture right now, if that's not included as part of the, I guess, the recommendation, that will have to be decided at a later point, or will be deferred? Is that the assumption?
Through you, Madam Chair, as it's currently structured in the recommendations, it would be deferred until such time as funding were available.
So that wouldn't be discussed as part of the master plan then?
No, it could be. In terms of the final recommendation to bring back the funding and implementation plan, we could look at all of those things, but our first recommendation is just recognizing the criticality of doing the basics first.
Okay, so it would remain in the master plan, but it could happen at a later point. If all those, so the costs that are outlined in the report, the way it's broken down, is that very high-level conservative numbers, or we're close in line what the expected cost would be?
At this point, I would consider them to be a very high-level estimate, yes.
So there could be more?
Or less.
Or less, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Verbanovic.
Thank you very much. So my next question is with respect to, I guess, the whole concrete area, I'll say to the breeze, to the north of the water area and ice rink. Did we at all consider the possibility of some sort of grassed-in area there in a way that would work for special events, but just sort of to get rid of some of the concrete?
I'm sorry, for clarification, you're referring to the Carl Zare Square
Yes,
side?
sorry, in Carl Zare Square, yes. So to the north of the fountain ice rink area.
Through you, Madam Chair, I would suggest that wasn't considered as part of the plan, just recognizing the extensive use that area gets, and sort of we needing a surface that's much more durable than turf.
Okay. What about something like artificial turf? I know that's being looked at in a number of areas. Just I look at sort of the number of times that people just end up sitting on the ground or whatever because, is there something friendlier and not as heat intensive as concrete.
We have looked at artificial turf or synthetic turf in the past. You'll find it tends to be hotter than concrete at sometimes. If you've ever been down on like a sports field, it'll be a lot harder because of the reflective properties. It also adds a bit of, from a city's perspective, maintenance and operations. It's not as though you could put synthetic down and just let it be. You have to worry about disinfecting, cleaning, backfilling with the pebble material. There's a lot goes into it. You're not going to see a lot of, again, cost savings from turf or synthetic turf to a precast paver system.
Okay, those are all the questions I have for now.
Okay. Councillor Yanetsky.
Yeah, just 2 or 3 more questions here. In regards to the stage, the not the one that's the smaller one, but the one that's used for the larger events, like during Oktoberfest, when you get a large number of people coming out. And you said it's all rented out and it costs money setting it up and all that stuff. Would it be included all this package to own the stage and we have it instead of renting it all the time and using it for these events, or can it be designed in such a way into the square where it's built in that maybe just rises when you need it on hydraulics or something like that? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out as a thinking out of the box sort of scenario.
You're right in line with actually some of the concepts we had originally talked about. We at one point did talk about a stage that would set within the surface of the parking garage and the plaza itself. We don't have a lot of depth between the two. I think there's only about 2 feet. So you would have to do a pretty intricate scissor type style. One of our concerns is, in talking with events, is what happens if it's Friday, 3 o'clock, you go to hit the button and nothing rises. Then you're stuck, right? With the stage design that's currently proposed, we did talk about at one point, and still could be part of the concept, is essentially having like a bleacher system where you could extend the stage the way it's designed. It's just the affordability and the cost of that goes up. But we could pull edges out and pull the front out, and we could grow the size of the stage if needed, if that was something we wanted to conceptualize.
So would it be reasonable to own a stage and then just set it up whenever you need it? And then where would you store it?
A new stage in SL100 is about $150,000. There is annual maintenance. I don't have those costs. I've sent an email while I'm here trying to get those before we do leave. And then, as you noted, where do you store it? It's a tractor trailer is essentially what it is, and then it unfolds from there and builds. So storage is an issue. Out in the elements can deteriorate the quality of it. And then as well, you would still have to look at the sound and lighting packages that you'd bring in, plus the back line. I don't think we want to get in the business of, having the one-size-fits-all for an event. It'd be nice to have a stage, and it sounds great in concept. But every band is different. Every, entertainer that you bring in is completely different, and the cost to own that, maintain it, would just be difficult.
Okay, I didn't know. I had no idea. You've answered the question. One of the scenarios you commented on, not a scenario, but the scenario where from College Street, where you can go down the ramp into the City Hall Square, and then you got those sort of tiered steps going up to the upper level. Is that going to remain those tiered steps? Are you planning to eliminate them or make a ramp out of it?
Through you, Madam Chair, we did not alter that design at all in the proposed designs.
So you're just leaving it as is?
Yeah, the difficulty is that to try and make it accessible, we don't have enough distance to be able to reduce the grade to the percentage that would be allowed.
Okay. The upper level terrace that overlooks the square, the only time I've ever seen people there is during Oktoberfest when they're overlooking and the square is full. Any ideas what you can use to utilize that upper level, putting some more tables and chairs up there so people can sort of sit up there and be in the shade and overlook the square? I don't know, any concepts, or I didn't see any suggestions in the document.
Yeah, through the chair. Certainly that's one of the areas that we recognized as being an underutilized space. I think part of it is explained by what we were talking about in terms of whether people perceive that they're welcome to be there, except for, on a particularly crowded day. I think our colleagues in economic development and special events have tried to put, chairs and tables and that kind of thing up there. But again, it's a bit disconnected sometimes from the other activities taking place as well. So it is a difficult space to program, I would suggest.
Okay. And the final question I have, back when this City Hall was being built back 25 years ago, I worked in the planning department, and we were part of the group of people involved in doing roundtable discussions and getting things to happen. So eventually, I had a minor role in it as part of staff, because a number of staff were involved. I do recall that the intent of the main structure, the Berlin Tower that was built to accommodate the staff for a period of years. And sometimes they talked about the future growth of expanding the building and putting up a second tower beside it at Duke and Yonge. Was that ever in the back of your mind to keep that option there if you're trying to do something with the square, not knowing whether the number of staff have increased, where were we going to be looking at? Now, that was more of a very long range. We're talking 25 to 50 years. Well, we're sort of halfway there.
Through you, Madam Chair, I have heard that there existed that possibility of an additional tower being built on that corner, and my understanding is that's why it's part of the elevated terrace that it is currently. However, I think, again, as with many things, how we accommodate staff has evolved over time. Not insignificantly, we have developed the Kitchener Operations Facility, so a number of staff that previously may have been housed here at City Hall now live at a different location, as well as using more modular designs and kind of putting more people in the same footprint. So while it may have been anticipated, I don't know that it's expected to be needed in the immediate term.
Okay, at least you were aware of it. Thank you.
Regardless, the membrane work still needs to be done for the parking garage, right, in that area. Okay. Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. Just following up on the questions and concerns that the mayor mentioned about the rink. Do we know what the city of Edmonton does? Because my understanding is they have a, well, I've seen it when I was there, it's a wading pool, but it also gets transferred, altered into a skating rink in the winter. So how are they accommodating that? It certainly was very actively used when I was there last year for FCM. I think that I'd be interested to know. You may not know what that is. When we were talking about economic development, we were talking about the events, and Mr. Young was talking about the differences, between this kind of stage and, we see it in our report with the number of different events we've had and how it's increased. But aren't a number of those events free to the public?
Chair, every event that's in the downtown, to the best of my knowledge, is free to the public. Yeah. The only event that I can think of off the top of my head that charges any admission would be Blues on the Thursday night. But then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, everything is free to the public. Yeah,
so I think it must be hard in a way for us to do an analysis about what the economic development impact is on improving the stage. Wouldn't it not be if the events are free?
No. Each event, the large ones, what we've asked the event organizers to do, and we've heard that over the past couple of years with Big Music Fest, Ever After, Country Music has one coming, Blues is provided as well, is the economic impact that they have locally. And we're trying to get everybody to use the TRIM model that's put out by the province. That way everybody's, it's comparing apples to apples. And then we can get a real indication of what the impact is of these large festivals to the city. But in terms of the attendance, that would further enhance the economic impact just because you're getting more people out.
Right. Okay. Two of the things I want to ask about is, again, it comes out of my meeting with the Shade Policy Group. One is along the front of where King and the Square meet. Have we considered some low boxed-in shrubs, sort of to give a bit of a break, to sort of do what the mayor was talking about in terms of maybe sort of a grassy area. Certainly there are ones that are not as impacted by salt, because of course that would be the first concern is salt. But you could also box them in and have them as a sitting area, and that may help with the grade separation for the pool versus fountain versus rink kind of thing. Has that been part of our design discussions at all?
Certainly we've not looked at a specific design like that, but what I can tell you is that what this design presents is the potential development of the square, and it's an attempt to balance best what we heard from multiple kind of interests in terms of doing events as well as shade, that kind of thing. So, I think as we move forward, if we understand what the highest priorities are, then we would be working more specifically towards achieving those objectives. If shade is a very high priority, then we would approach it in terms of trying to achieve that, as well as sort of being able to have it flexible and still be able to quickly take it down if we needed to for events and that kind of thing.
And I think I've been to most of the public houses, open houses, and then I heard again and again just from people talking, and if you're sitting out in the square, it's always the same. It's too hot, and it's too windy. Right, so if we can find ways to break some of that wind, and I'm pretty sure that when you spoke to the shade group, the ideas of shade sails, which can easily be taken down, and we've got the building. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of that, and I'm going to include some of that in my comments. Okay, that's all the questions I have right now.
Okay, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. So I have a question just around. If we did not go ahead and replace the rink right away, the rink and fountain and stage, what would be the impact then? Wouldn't we have to tear up everything anyway? And then have you considered what it would look like if we didn't do that? Would we be able to put back the existing fountain?
Sorry, Mr. Evans.
Through the chair, we could work around the fountain. There would be a risk that we haven't replaced any of the refrigeration units, so that could go at any time. But if we wanted to install this vision at a later date, we would have to go back and regrade all the areas that were done previous.
One of the critical things, though, if I'm understanding correctly, is that we've got all this leaking moisture coming into the parking garage. How can we be sure that if we work around the existing fountain and the existing stage, that we would get all the leaking points?
Through the chair, that is a good point. There are some tests that we could do to try and investigate a little bit around those areas, but there may be gaps around that because we would be doing some invasive testing into there.
Yeah, water is pretty hard to test for where it's coming from, as we know from other buildings that we own. I know that this design work is a long time coming. This beautiful package was not just sort of thought of overnight. This has been over a year of work, and I want to just acknowledge that. And so when council is we're asking for tweaks to it, of course that's inevitable. But I want to just acknowledge that we're not going to be able to change everything on the fly without serious consideration as to the overall design. Thank you.
I have just one more question before we move into comments. Has there been understanding that this is a high-level estimate? You've given us that estimate based on if we did it all concurrently. Do you have the costing if we do it separately? How much more does that increase the cost if we did the ice rink and the fountain, a couple of years after, and the stage piece? Because I think you've given us the information on if we do it all together, but what is that cost difference?
Through the chair, that's something we could report back as part of the implementation and funding strategy.
Okay, so you haven't done that yet, but but we would be able to get that information when you come back. And that the time frame, do we have a time frame on that report back? I don't see it in the recommendation.
Through the chair, the intent is to inform the 2018 budget process, so it would be sometime next year.
Okay. All right, that's all the questions we have for now anyways. We are going to open it up to comments. I'll just remind everybody we're a few minutes behind, but we're doing pretty good. So I want everyone to have their chance. It's been moved by Councillor Marsh, and she has moved option number 3. So the recommendation as stated, that third paragraph, she is saying that her recommendation and motion is to replace the ice rink, fountain, and stage, as well as the critical infrastructure. Okay? Everyone's clear on that? All right. Everyone's going to get their 5 minutes. First, Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair Galloway-Seelock. I am going to vote in favor of this, but I want to be clear because there's a lot of room for misunderstanding as to what we're actually approving at this point. First of all, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty on the design. I think there's a lot of work behind with staff and the public on the design that's here, and I think the last thing you need is another opinion on how to arrange the furniture. So I'm content with the work that's been done. My concern is the finances. So what I'm approving at this point is staff looking at a total estimated cost of $7.1 million, if I'm understanding correctly, is option 3. But what I want to be 100% clear on at this point is that in no way am I expecting to go back to the public, the taxpayer, to fund all of this. I've already heard significant comments in terms of operating cost savings once we do this, in terms of staff using less of their time. There was one single instance of $900 in cost with respect to the fountains. I've also heard about potential new revenue generation if the stage goes in, that we could offset some dollars in that respect. And with respect to the stage, I'm looking forward to seeing if economic development thinks that it's a significant enough investment that they may put some towards from a reserve fund. I've also heard that some funding may come from the parking enterprise because there's the garage aspect on this. And lastly, I've also heard that there's a possibility to look at grants as another funding source. So I want to be 100% clear that the approval of the $7.1 million, looking at it, is not going to be necessarily going back in whole or obviously in part to the taxpayer. I also want to be clear that this looks like, I want to make sure it's not painted as a sort of a new project. Really everything we're looking at, there's going to be some dressing, but really everything we're looking at here is infrastructure. We're replacing pavers that are end of life. We're replacing the reflecting pool and skating rink that's end of life. We're replacing a stage that is non-functional and end of life. So I want to be clear on all of those points, but aside from that, I look forward to seeing what staff comes back with. And again, I would urge staff to, when they're looking at this, to come back with potential operating savings costs as well as all the funding sources using the general tax levy as a last resort.
Councillor Singh.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. To settle this in my mind and come to willingness to support and move forward, I had to kind of break it down into two components. There is a critical infrastructure component. We can't shy away from a responsibility. This is a space that needs to be repaired. It needs to be remediated. Otherwise, the cost will only mount more. And on top of it, there is a serious safety concern with the pavers that is very visible walking and seeing the gaps and where it's risen in some areas. So that needs to be done regardless of the cost. It's not something you do happily when you have to do repairs around your home, but when something breaks down, you just have to kind of go do it. And a big component of what we're in principle supporting today are things that we can't shy away from. We need to do no matter what. The addition for the stage and fountain and rink, the way I settled that in my mind and come to terms, Again, this is very high level. This is a master plan. Ultimately, we still need to have a lot more questions answered. I asked staff, what is the cost of not doing this outside of increased inflationary costs, but the cost of economic development and the cost that's taken away from placemaking if we don't do this sooner and rather later. That's something that needs to be better articulated to present a more reasonable rationale to justify that price sticker, because it is relatively high, especially when we're told that the life cycle has come due on some of the components of this, the pool or the stage. But honestly speaking, if it had been planned at that time differently, maybe that age could have been longer, the usefulness could have been longer. And that's why we want to make sure we're not rushing and we do implement the changes that we get the maximum benefit and not necessarily something that just looks good. Because ultimately, when this was being designed, I'm sure it looked very well. I'm sure it had a lot of support. But again, it had issues, and we are seeing those. And we don't want to make that same mistake. So sometimes it's better to be cautious, do what you need to do, and the things that are kind of good to have, do it right so that the investment justifies the cost. The other components of it, I would hope staff do include aspects of the site features, because ultimately the hard infrastructure is good, but something that we've heard from our residents, I think from the feedback, is the aesthetics. That needs to be part of it. I think to do one without the other. If you do end up going ahead with the fountain as well as the stage, we need to ensure that the entire usability of the Carl's Air Square is to the optimum extent, and that will require the right tweaking. And you're right, we can't tweak on spot, but we need to ensure that, of course, as I said, when we're investing and spending in this, we're implementing the right type of changes that we get the best benefit out of this. I would encourage, I think we can put off some components on the Charles and Duke and College in the rear of the City Hall. There is a lot of development that will take place. There is a lot of changes surrounding the City Hall that will take place in the next 5 to 10 years, and we don't want to rush as to what that space can be used for. I think it's been alluded to that space had plans of development, future development, and if that utilization can be still made, we need to ensure that we're not putting monies in that if we may ultimately down the road be ripping up again for some prospective development, which ultimately could end up being something that pays for the stuff that's being done in Carl's Air Square. So I will support this because this is very high level. We're not deciding anything yet. I think we really do need to do that rational engagement and continue engagement, as well as looking at seeing how this can be budgeted and really be reflected in putting our hand in our pocket and see exactly how much change is there and being more realistic as to what we can afford to do. But for now, I think we do have to go forward in planning and find the right type of funding sources. And as Councillor Davey has said, but it needs to be something that is not focused on the tax base.
That was your 5 minutes exactly. Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Galloway Seelock. I want to thank staff for the hard work that's gone into this. It's a great report. I attended some of the open houses and heard firsthand the excitement from the citizens that attended and just the desire to keep this as a great gathering spot for our city. I'm going to support this option 3. It looks after the critical infrastructure issues, and the costs now will make a positive impact many years down the road. Now, noting that much work still has to be done in planning on how to pay for it and finding partners, but I like what this can do, adding to the vibrancy of our city, additional pride, the enhanced experience for big events and day-to-day use, both on the Carl's Air Square side and the Duke Street, as well as changes come there with the LRT. I think it'll be a great place to gather as well. So I'm good for this.
Councillor Netsky.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank staff for putting this thing together. I know it's a lot of work. Just reflecting on reading through all this material, what we went through back 25 years ago. Anyways, when we did go through this 25 years ago, the $63 million project was concerned to a lot of taxpayers. They says, wow, we're going to be spending money, and where are we going to get the money from? But it did move forward because we did not have a city hall at that time, and this was the what resulted in it. And so as a result of what was built back 25 years ago has now become a gem here in the city of Kitchener, and sort of become really the center of the universe for our community here, and it's just a wonderful project. But I also recall at the time that they said that as this building moves on in years, there'll be maintenance issues that will need to be addressed. And here we are today, 23 years later, and there are issues that need to be addressed, from the parking garage to the ice rink, the fountains, as you've all explained. So the time now is to address these issues, because if they don't, they won't go away. They'll just get worse, and they only have bigger problems. So I'm prepared to support item number 3, or option number 3, to deal with the whole thing. I know we'll have money issues to consider. Where's the money going to come from, and how will do we stage it, etc. Those will be addressed as we work through that over the next short little while. I think this is a necessity. We are trying to make sure that the vibrance of the downtown still continues and moves forward. And to have that, you need to have a facility that looks A1 condition, and you need to maintain your facilities. So just like any other facility we have in Kitchener, whether it's the auditorium, community centers, pools, this happens to be the big one here in Kitchener, so it needs to be given attention as well. So I'm prepared to support option number 3.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Yes, I too want to thank staff for their hard work, and to the consultants as well for their hard work on this design. I have been to several consultations on this as well, and I've heard from multiple residents independently, and I think that a lot of the elements have been addressed that people in terms of feedback. I am a tiny bit concerned, though, that the skating rink in the wintertime, because it will be more shallow, may have a shorter lifespan in terms of the season. I think that we may benefit down the road when staff comes back with a master plan on how to implement this, that we may want to look at tiny tweaks to the design that could ensure that the community's priorities are going to be realized here. I think it's really important in terms of economic development that we do maximize our ability to host larger scale events at our iconic City Hall. Yes, the events are free, but the economic impact on our local businesses throughout the city and region, including the hotel industry, the restaurant sector, and retail sector, we have an opportunity here to impact all of those. So I'm looking forward to seeing the result of our vote. I would like to call for a recorded vote.
Thank you. We will do that. Up next is Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. It's always a challenge to formulate a master plan, because there are so many variables, and certainly the challenge for a space like our City Hall Square, where many people participate in events and come for lunch. You've got an awful lot of different viewpoints and different ideas to consider. So I think you've done a pretty good job of encapsulating a lot of the ideas and a lot of the concerns. And I do really appreciate that you've put some dollar values to what some of the costs would be, and that you've also divided out what's critical work with more amenity work. I think that's also could be discussed and debated for longer, because it depends on what is your particular interest and what is your particular desire or agenda. I think there's been a lot of concerns raised today about the cost and about the look and what could change and what could affect this amenity space and for public events as well as special events and just general people being in the square. I'm a little bit worried about some surprise costs because just like anything, when you start peeling back the layers of a building, who knows what we're going to see. And those critical costs, I think, are the most important that we have to be looking at. I also want to be very clear that the concepts I'm seeing are still concepts, that there's going to be ongoing discussion and tweaks with some of our partners, and especially our regional partners. I know I had to push a little bit on making sure that we did have discussions with our shade policy partners at the region, and I'm really pleased that that was taken with sincere heart and those discussions happened. I do see that, if I want to get into some nitty-gritty, there are some very glaring pieces here that I think we really do need to tweak, and since you've already indicated you're going to have those discussions, I won't get into those components right now. I would like to see that we do separate out the Duke Street component in the non-critical work. I think that site, although it's not used as well as maybe we would like it to be used, once the construction of our ION is done, I think we will see some more uptake. And it's a nice, quiet space, and possibly our neighbors at City Centre may be using that space. And I think that still remains to be seen. We may find other ways to animate that space as time goes on. We do have to be aware that UV protection is critical. This, just looking at this space, this picture right now, I have very serious concerns about people sitting in the square and what is the impact of that on them. We have to find ways to make sure that people are protected, and especially our young children. If they are using that pool, splash area, whatever it's going to be, we can't just count on parents putting on the appropriate amount of sunscreen. So we have to figure out how to do that as well. And there are lots of design elements, I think, that can be discussed through our regional partners and other cities and what they're doing. So I think I'm a little bit reluctant to support the whole sort of enchilada right now, because I really think the critical work is what has to be done. I want to make sure that, but I also don't want to see us adding costs if we find that maybe that's what has to happen, is once we look at the critical components, that if we see that those costs are going to overrun what the estimate is, that maybe we need to put on hold the fountain or the stage work. We may be able to do some of the groundwork, so to speak, so that it is there when we are able to afford it and we have the money. And citizens are going to be concerned about the cost of this project. Even though many people come downtown for many events, many don't come downtown, and they may see this as a waste of tax dollars. So I'm glad that Councillor Davey was very clear that he doesn't want to see this as an additional load on our tax space, and that I think we can find a variety of different ways to fund the changes that need to happen, the critical components, as well as the amenity space. But the public needs to know that we still have a fair bit way to go.
Thank you. And you were right on your 5 minutes as well. And Mayor Verbanovic.
Thanks, Chair Galloway-Sealock, and thanks again to staff for all of the work that's been done on this. As people will recall, this building was part of a national competition at the time, actually, to build a city hall, and it actually came down to 5 final projects that came before the community, and this one by Kookaburra, Payne, McKenna, Bloomberg was selected and went on to win a Governor General's Award at the time, and has truly been a magnificent facility, not only as the seat of local government, but more importantly as our community's primary gathering space. for our citizens to come together for celebratory events of all types, as well as commemorative events from time to time. And as we know, we've seen everything from the opening of Oktoberfest and Blues Festival here to sad events like our community's commemoration of things like the Paris bombings and the Orlando massacre and so on. And so, when you think about great cities and the kinds of things you go to see in many communities that you visit, city halls are often at the forefront. But when city halls aren't at the forefront, civic squares certainly are at the forefront. And it's often one of the things that people talk about when they leave a community is what the civic spaces in that community and particularly in the center of that community were like. And they're often the places where the most vibrancy occurs, where civic gatherings and activities occur. And as such, I think the recommendations that before us really focuses on the role that this square and the Duke Street side of the building play for the community, for that plethora of purposes that's brought well over 500,000-600,000 people into the square each year. Like any of our infrastructure, it does from time to time need updating and need replacing, and that probably should have worked itself into some of our capital budget planning earlier on, but it didn't. And so now we're at a point where we're dealing with this master plan, and staff are going to have to go and look at how to make that happen. I think the master plan, as it's proposed, it truly is getting at many of the things we've heard from the community, certainly many of the things I've heard in the past, both capitalizing on some of the strengths, but also making changes to improve things that we heard people would like to benefit from. There's obviously going to be a lot more dialogue that goes on between now and any work that actually happens, including looking at funding sources. I think there will be some new opportunities, particularly because of some of the things we're doing from an environmental point of view, that might allow us to capitalize on some of the dollars that the feds will have available either through climate change funding and other capital funding. And so we need to make sure that we take advantage of that, both from the federal government and the provincial government going forward. So I will support this and look forward to the additional information and dialogue that will happen in the months ahead.
Thank you. So that's everyone's comments except for my own. I too just want to take a quick moment to thank staff for this. It's been a long time in the making, from the first time it came forward to what the heck are we doing to something concrete in front of us today. But I come back to what we're approving here today, and that, quite frankly, we're not even approving a master plan. We're receiving a master plan, and I think that sometimes we argue over that word, but so we're receiving a master plan. We're saying that our critical infrastructure is our first priority, that we are willing to look at the ice rink, fountain, and stage as a priority as well, that the rest of the work be deferred, and that staff come back with a multi-year funding and implementation strategy that includes looking at other partners, both provincial, federal, and private sector funding. And so I come back to that we really are in the early stages of potentially implementing a master plan. And my history with master plans is sometimes they get put on the shelf and they don't end up with funding. So where I come in today is that we're looking to potentially, at least today, look at finding $7.1 million for an amenity, which is a great amenity. I don't disagree with anything anybody's saying with regards to its importance in our community with regards to economic development. But $7.1 million when there's many other amenities across the city that need funding that have been in place for a lot longer is something that I continue to keep on my radar. And even when we talk about using the federal or provincial dollars, those are competing with other projects and amenities and facilities across the city that still do need to be built, from parks to recreational opportunities. So there's a lot that I just kind of try to keep that whole picture. But having said all that, I also look at what's critical here and what are nice to haves. And I look at the way, I'm looking forward to hearing from staff the ways we can accomplish the goals, efficiencies, and functionality of this master plan, but by doing it maybe at a lower cost than what has been presented in front of us. And I know that the takeaway that you can move forward with today is seeing if there's any middle option in making sure you're able to still accomplish your goals, your efficiencies, and your functionality, but doing it maybe at a cost a little bit less. So I'm willing to move forward with the recommendation as been put forward in support number 3, again, with staff coming back with the report. And I look forward to that discussion with the funding and implementation plan so that we can really determine what portions of the master plan to move forward with that fit with our budget and our needs. I also think that I want to highlight as well that the functionality of the rink is important and must not be lost. And so I think that's something that I think has been said around the horseshoe that we need to keep in mind as that comes back. I'd also like to see if it's amenable by, I can't move anything, but I'm suggesting that through the report back that we do look at that naming right policy piece and focus just on one feature within the master plan that we may be able to generate some revenue from. And I leave that kind of in staff's hands to look at, obviously amendment to a policy, but maybe just one piece to look at from that perspective, and we can make those decisions at that time. And I'd also like some further information around how or what private sector dollar, how we're going to obtain of private sector dollars, because that's part of the recommendation as well, to understand how we might be able to do that in assisting us with funding some of this overall project. So I really do look forward to the piece, understanding we're in preliminary stages, and this is looking to inform our 2017 budget. So I will support looking at the full picture, but understand that once we get that next report, we really need to live within our means. We need to determine the critical needs, which I think staff have already established, and the nice to haves, and what makes the most sense financially and for our community as a whole. So, Mr. Mayor Verbanovic, do you have 10 seconds?
Your comments just reminded me of something. That original rink, the Lions Club were sponsors of, and so I think that needs to be factored in as that dialogue happens.
Good point, thank you. Okay, so that is all the questions, comments. A lot of input's been received, which is very good. So we can move this forward. A recorded vote has been called. It's been moved by Councillor Marsh. You may vote. Just for the record, I used pretty much my 5 minutes too. And that's carried unanimously by the people here today. We will have others probably join us at the council meeting when we will discuss this again. So thank you very much again to staff for all their work on this. And with that, I believe we are done community and infrastructure services. We do need to move into, what's that next meeting? Special council.